enjoy the talk.
Is this on?
Yes.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So the talk is called Modern JavaScript on Rails. And I am Jon Gautsch. I studied computer science at Notre Dame, and now I'm the founder of Referral, which is a healthcare startup here in town. We pretty much, can you see it?
Just trying to turn these lights off. Yeah, right in front of it.
Anyways, we manage scheduling of referrals for physician-to-physician referrals.
How about that?
That better?
Yeah.
So here's sort of an overview of the talk, what we're going to be talking about. So first we'll sort of talk about what the tools are, what are some of these modern JavaScript tools, and then we're going to talk about why would you ever want to use them. We've already got products out there that are just plain old, jQuery that comes with Rails. Why would we deviate from that? Why would we bother adding the complexity? And then assuming we say it's okay, good enough to add the complexity, let's say it's worth it, we'll look at sort of how do we add that to our stack. So we'll start with the what. What does modern JavaScript entail? So a few of the tools we'll be talking about will be NPM, ES 2015 or ES6 as it's sort of more commonly called, Webpack, and we won't really touch any of the frameworks, but all of these tools sort of enable you to use some of these heavy front-end frameworks like Ember or Angular or React or any of the others really. Although this will all be very framework agnostic, but it will give you sort of a pipeline to take any of those frameworks and add them to your Rails app. So what is all that? NPM is Node's package manager, and you can kind of think of it like, oh, that's way too small to see, isn't it? So this is a quote from the website. It says, NPM makes it easy for JavaScript developers to share and reuse code, and it makes it easy to update the code you're sharing. So you can kind of think of it like the JavaScript version of Ruby Gems, and it also includes a command line tool that's sort of the JavaScript version of Bundler, and all the packages are versioned, so that's sort of a big deal, and we'll sort of circle back to that in the why. But right now, if you think about your Rails applications, mostly gemified JavaScripts that you've thrown in there that are probably horribly maintained, or it's JavaScripts that you've copied and pasted into your vendor lib, your vendor directory, which is also not a great way to do things if you're looking to maintain. ES6 or ES 2015 is the sort of next generation of the JavaScript language, and it's sort of you're enabled to use it via Babel. Obviously, the JavaScript implementation is up to the browser that your user is using. But Babel allows you to write ES6 or ES 2015 and have it compiled down to ES5 JavaScript. And you can even shim it down to ES4. So we are actually writing ES6, but supporting users on IE8, which is pretty cool. So here's a little example of the difference between ES5 and ES6. Just sort of highlighting a few different features. You've got string interpolation here, instead of sort of manually concatenating the strings. You've got default argument values, which is also very nice and useful. You get this sort of short, fat arrow syntax for functions, which if you spend a lot of time in JavaScript, you've definitely been in the case where you're binding to this. You don't have to do that with Stabby via fat arrow functions. This is the same in here as it is out here, which is nice. You've got const and let, which are different ways you can sort of replace var with const or let, and it sort of is a constant or has different scoping rules. And it's really nice. I mean, the features of the language enable you to write sort of more expressive code. And here's, again, you can't really see it, but a big list of all the different ES6 features, which are all very useful, and Babel allows you to use them. And then Webpack, which is sort of difficult to describe until you're actually using it, but it's essentially a module bundler, which means you write these JavaScript modules, and then you sort of declare these dependency chains between them. This module depends on this one, depends on this one. And in Ruby, everything's global really in Ruby. When you declare a class, it's global to your app now. You can use it in any other file, whereas JavaScript, when you're writing it this way, it's sort of the other way around. They're modules, and then you explicitly import them in other files whenever you want to use them. And so Webpack will sort of read the dependency tree of the import statements, build up a file of everything that you need, and enable you to serve that to your client in a way that the browser can understand. So it takes a bunch of assets and outputs compiled assets that you can serve to your client. And then your framework du jour, which could really be anything. If you were to opt for something more esoteric like the HTML9 responsive bootstrap.js. So here's a little quote that sort of is reflective, I feel reflects the sort of state of JavaScript. Today, like a flower in the field of existence, tomorrow outdated and old-fashioned, shaken by the winds of time. And Pope Pius XII actually said that. His Humani Generis encyclical. But the point is that JavaScript moves very, very quickly, and again, sort of going back to maintenance of these modules and these libraries. You don't ever want to do that on your own. It's a huge pain to, and the person who you're depending on to do that in the gem probably isn't doing it well enough. And so allowing, sort of becoming a first-class citizen in this sort of JavaScript world is very beneficial to your application. And so sort of looking into why do you want any of this, maybe you don't, that's totally fine. If your application, if you don't need it, don't add it. But what are some of the cases where you might think that you need it? So Linus Torvalds says that he's a very pragmatic person, that which works, works. If you feel that way as well, by all means, there's no reason to jump on any kind of bandwagon here. But what are some potential benefits? So whenever we think about developing, we're sort of combining ideas, tools, and workflow to create a product, to be productive in some way. And if you can improve either of those three ingredients, theoretically, all other things equal, you can improve your product, either how long it takes you to produce the product, or the quality of the product, maintainability of the product, how enjoyable it is to work on the product, anything like that. So we're going to look at the tools and workflows. I can't really help you with the ideas. So considering the tools you add to your project and your stack is sort of the trade-off in your architecture and your productivity, here's a sort of chart about how I like to sort of think of it. The red represents sort of lighter, simpler frameworks or tools. In Ruby, it might be Sinatra. JavaScript, it might be jQuery, something just simple, easy to use, very easy to get going, immediately productive. And then the green line represents something that's heavier, more complicated framework or tooling. Rails is actually a fairly heavy framework. There's a lot going on there. And it's, to beginners, it's a lot of magic. To more advanced users, it's sometimes you fight with it, sometimes you just go with it. But it's heavy. In the JavaScript world, it would be the Webpack, and then your framework, whatever it might be. Again, not necessarily as productive at the outset, but the longer you spend, the more time you spend with it, each incremental amount of time you give with it, you get a little bit more productivity. You don't hit as many walls as soon as you otherwise would with a simpler tool. Imagine maintaining an absolutely huge Sinatra app or an absolutely huge jQuery app. It can become a nightmare. So, assuming that you do hit this point, we're just going to assume from here on out that we do hit this point and that it is worth it to opt for the heavier tool set. So again, all other things equal, with better tools and better workflow, you get a better product, or at least one that's more enjoyable to work on and easier to maintain. So the benefits of each of these, sort of broken out by tool, would be NPM provides you with these maintained versioned packages that you don't have to worry about maintaining yourself. Just upgrade when appropriate. ES 2015, it provides you a more expressive language. CoffeeScript, people say it does the same thing, but it's sort of falling out of favor. You can definitely still use CoffeeScript with this stack. Webpack will compile that to JavaScript for you. And then Webpack, which sort of is the backbone of the whole tool set and bundles everything together. And it enables new workflows that are currently entirely impossible in Rails, like hot module replacement, which allows you to basically edit code of a live web page without requiring a refresh or losing state or anything like that, which is a really, really great way to work if you're doing front-end work. Brett Victor, if you've ever seen his Inventing on Principle talk, shows sort of developing a game, and there's a Mario that you can sort of see the trajectory which he'll jump. You change the code, and it changes the trajectory, and it's very, very easy to sort of iterate on the product. And we're able to sort of do something like that here with our front end. So here's a little demo. Here's a little timer app, super simple timer app. But say we're developing the front end. We're testing out different styles, and maybe we've already got a mock or something like that, and we just want to actually code it up. Well, we can start the page running. It's running, and we can actually change the CSS here while it's running, and it's not going to reload. So maybe that should be green. Maybe we should make this bigger. Yeah, that looks nice. Maybe make that red. So it goes even beyond live reload, where you change your CSS and it reloads the page. This is actually, there's JavaScript sitting on this page, listening for changes on a socket. Changes get made, it pulls in the changes and applies them to your live page, which is great. And this is, again, there are incredible demos by guys like Dan Abramov where he's doing this with the React app. There's this, as we'll go through some code here in a few minutes. This is just a simple jQuery app. I'm basically just taking some code off of page, and it's about as simple as it can be even in Rails. It's just in a different spot. So that's very, very useful and convenient for new development. So how does it work? Basically, and this is very heavily inspired by Kevin Holt over there. He's got a great blog post on how to set some of this stuff up. So in development, you basically proxy asset requests that are looking for anything that Webpack is bundled, and you proxy them to the Webpack dev server, which you've got running in parallel to your Rails server locally. For production, you tell Webpack to bundle everything up and make it ready to go for production, and then you pass it into the Rails asset pipeline, and then it just goes out with everything else. So that's sort of the two sides, and that's a very sort of high-level overview, but we'll jump into some code in a minute. And then how do I get there in my existing Rails app? So the demo toolchain doesn't really assume anything about your app. You can bolt it on to basically any existing Rails app. I guess unless you're already serving your front end a separate way. But if it's just a plain vanilla Rails app, you can entirely bolt this on, and it wouldn't affect the app at all. It only really gets complicated when you consider adding in a hybrid single-page app to an existing Rails application, which is a little beyond the scope of this talk. But the two sort of strategies there are to have a catch-all route in your routes file, and then serve up the single-page app there. And then any 404s that happen, the client handles. So the server essentially responds to 200, and then the client renders a 404 page. Or if you have like a sidebar that you need to be maintained, you can't just clobber your whole app or your whole view there or something. And this is what we are actually doing in production right now. We have a single-page app that renders just a part of the app, just a part of the view, basically the main widget thing. And on routes that aren't recognized, it just doesn't render anything, or it doesn't get served. We took both approaches. We right now are not actually serving it if it doesn't need to be served. But here are some resources, and I'll post these slides up. But we'll go ahead and jump into some code and see what's going on. So here is the repository where you can find any of this code. And we're going to look at pull requests. So it first was just a very plain, boring Rails app that had the timer page and some jQuery running on the timer page that ran the timer. And so here are the files that are changed. So we'll sort of go through each of these and talk about what piece of the puzzle they are. So get ignore, that's sort of self-explanatory. This is just read by the editor to sort of understand and mark up the JavaScript. It's just JSON. Gem file, we're using Foreman to start these two processes. Like I mentioned, you've got a Webpack dev server and the Rails server, which are running in parallel. So the two different processes are here. Or actually, I should probably provide some background on the NPM stuff first. So NPM, in addition to allowing you to install packages, it also allows you to sort of configure command line scripts. So we'll go to package.json. So here we've got this main defined. So npm start is going to find this main file, and you say start, it's going to run this file. Oh yeah, no problem. How's that? Yeah, cool. So here are the two commands to run the two processes to develop this app. The web, which is just Rails server, that's what we're all used to. And the client, it basically changes directory to the client, which we've added here, so file structure. Might be a little too small to see, but it's a client directory that's sitting alongside the app directory, and just at the root of the app. And in there is where we basically write the client of the app. And we found that's a very sane way to organize things and keep things straight. And so we've got a package.json file in there, which we're looking at right here. And the command to start it is just this server.js file. So okay, well, let's look at server.js. So server.js is running this Webpack development server, which is basically watching our client files, our JavaScripts and our CSS in here. It's watching it for changes. It's saying, okay, you changed it, let's grab it, let's rebundle it, let's resend it up to the client. And we're running that on port 8080. So, okay, well, how do we serve assets that are running on a server that's running on port 8080 and a Rails app that's running on port 3000? So I think this is one of the things from Kevin's blog, but basically what we're doing is we're proxying those requests, just developing RB over here. We're saying, okay, action controller asset host. We're going to look at every request, and if it includes If it matches this regex, then proxy it over here. And one of the things that I actually didn't notice at first, but that Rails does that's pretty cool, is when you, let's see, when you include this bundle over here, it'll generate this link, and it'll actually generate it with this as the host. So it's doing a little more than just even proxying, which is pretty cool. So we proxy the requests that match this regex over to the running Webpack server. So, okay, well, how's the Webpack server work? Here's some config options, but it says, okay, we're gonna serve it at this public path. Well, let's make this public path match the path that it would be served at in production. So in development, the requests are served by the Webpack dev server. In production, they're served by the Rails app. So the paths essentially need to match. That way they need to match. So to do that, we need to consider what the host, the path would be in production, and then configure it to basically serve that from the Webpack dev server, just two different hosts. So jumping into the Webpack. Do we have any questions so far? Might be good to. Yep.
On the asset host, you're basically matching the web bundle JS, right?
Yep.
What if nothing matches there? How does it know what the asset host is? How does it know to like serve it locally?
If it doesn't match this, it's just going to go to JavaScript. Or sorry, it's going to go to the Rails server.
Okay.
So we're in sort of bundling up the assets. We bundle them to a single file. So we've got all these different JavaScript files, and that's part of the job of Webpack. Is going back over here. So we write JavaScript in a bunch of different files, and then we have Webpack bundled up into a single file, and that's what we include in the application. It's sort of like we do with Sprockets. You know, we find these manifests and include a bunch of different files. We sort of do the same thing with Webpack.
Is that single file, are you going to go into code splitting at all?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a feature where you can, of Webpack, that's more of an advanced feature, and we're not actually using it right now. But basically what you can do is you can say, okay, I've got this huge JavaScript app, and it's like 2 megs or something crazy, and I only want to load the parts that I need at certain times, so you can do this code splitting thing where you can load up the parts of your application as you need them, but I haven't actually done that, so we won't go into that. Do we have any other questions so far? Okay, so we'll jump into the Webpack configuration. So we pretty much have 2 different configurations. We've got the hot configuration, which is the development configuration, which is watching the files, rebundling the files, sending them back to the client over a socket, and maintaining that socket is something that Webpack handles. We don't ever have to worry about that. And then the production, which, if we're going to serve production assets, we want to do things like minify them or optimize them in different ways. Webpack has some nice features. I don't know too much about Sprockets, but maybe it does the same thing, or is able to do the same thing, but it'll actually analyze your JavaScript code and eliminate dead code, eliminate conditionals that would never get met or anything like that, and is able to sort of make your JavaScript much smaller because of that, which is nice. So that's our production configuration, and here's our development configuration. And they both sort of start with a shared common configuration. So we'll start there. So one of the criticisms the whole Webpack toolchain really receives from a lot of people who are just getting started is that it's just so dense to get going. There's just so much configuration. So we're going to sort of step through each of these and what they're doing, why we have them there, and what they do for us. So first is the context. We define context, basically setting where Webpack is going to look whenever we say import this file. So we're basically saying, okay, our context is just this directory right here. So anything we do is going to look right here. Now, when we're requiring JavaScript here, if we don't proceed it with any sort of path, relative path, or anything like that, it's going to first look at the node modules, the node npm packages that we've installed. So then the entry point is the sort of starting entry point of the application. So we define this file is where we start looking at JavaScript, and basically we're going to crawl out from there. So we've got this app.js. Okay, so we import some things. Webpack says, okay, I'll start with this file, and then I'll look at the import statements starting from there and pull in those dependencies as needed. So if there's another file that's never referenced here, it's not going to make it out to the client. If there's a file that's referenced here, NPM will find it via the dependency chain and bundle it up. We can have multiple different entry points, And in production, we actually have basically one entry point per application layout. We've got like an admin app, we've got a user app, we've got a couple of different apps, and so we basically make one per layout. And so we could add another here that's like user scripts. User app.js. Now these names, we can have them interpolated into the final output name of the bundled file, which is very useful. And so that's why we're able to do a regex over here. What the files will end up being named, let's see if output is over here. Let's look at this one. So later on, we're going to define our output. We're going to say, okay, the file name of the output is this interpolated string. So anything that gets bundled up by Webpack, we've defined to have this underscore Webpack bundle suffix, essentially, basically preceded by the name that we define over here. So this will be used, this will apply to any of the entry points we define over here. Each of these entry points will map to a bundle, an output bundle. And since they all have this, we have a regex we can proxy. So externals, if we already have this existing Rails application, we've got external JavaScript libraries. We don't want to go ahead and convert our entire application over. We've got all this work that we've already done and invested in. So we're just we want to include some of that. We want to be able to use that. We could use it as a global on window. That's okay, but a little confusing. I find that it's very nice to be able to sort of see your dependencies in the file. None of that, if you're doing any linting, your linter is going to wonder, well, where did that variable come from? It's not thinking, it's on window. Like even here, if we say alert, the linter right now is thinking, ooh, I don't know about any function variable called alert, which is where'd that come from? So we can configure it to be global, but nicer if we can just import it. So that's what we do over here. We basically are telling Webpack, what do we have as externals that we want to make importable? What's this global? What is this a global value? And what do we import from this name? What do we want to grab? So here we can import jQuery from jQuery. We don't have any sort of duplicate jQuery objects here. This is jQuery from Rails, where it will import it, have it be defined in this module, and use it as such. So this resolve is the directories that it's going to look at when you're importing from your modules. So this is basically you can add more paths to your search path and sort of what extensions you're looking for and willing to import, allowed to import. So Webpack's going to be confused if I import something with a .coffee or something, because I haven't defined it here. But it will at least know where to look for it, except told where to look. So that's what's going on there. Now the module and loaders, these are pretty cool and let you basically tell Webpack, all right, does the file name match this regex? If so, I want you to load it a certain way. Maybe that means taking a small image and basically converting it to a binary string and just throwing it in that way. Maybe it means adding a certain file name, some kind of hash of the file name if you're doing that here. But you can define these different loaders, and they're packages, NPM packages for basically loading any kind of file you would reasonably want to load. So that's sort of our base configuration that we're going to essentially inherit from both the development and production configurations. Do we have any questions over that stuff? Yep.
Sorry, maybe it's not the right time to ask, but
yeah.
Does this have any awareness of, like Sprockets would be able to use like asset URLs, right? So if we have an image, we can get the fingerprinted image URL. Does this handle that?
Well, not exactly. So what we do is, this might actually also be lifted from Kevin. I don't know if this is lifted from Kevin or somebody else, but basically what we do is we add a directory right here under client that's symlinked to the Rails image directory. And so if it's symlinked, the system thinks it's here. We can import images like this. Import, if it's a standard image like that, we can import that there and then use it. Something like that. I don't know the specifics off the top of my head at the moment, but no, it doesn't have awareness essentially of what Rails is going to do to change the path of the image.
So what's actually happening in the final when I, as a
Which file? Like an image?
The
one?
image, right. So now it's got to pull that image, you know, load the image or something. It's going to do, it's got to get the file somewhere. It's not going to, it's binary on a large file.
Yeah, you know, actually I don't have too much experience with that one yet. We haven't really done too much with images yet. Kevin, do you have any ideas on that one?
I just let Rails handle the images. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I literally, Rails has all that.
But so I see you doing stuff with CSS, right?
Yep.
So this is compiling your CSS, your Sass into CSS.
Yep.
So CSS will often reference images. In the past, you have to come.
But I don't use the CSS.
Oh, you don't use okay.
Yeah, we haven't referenced the images in
I
CSS
literally
yet.
just use it for JavaScript. So just to manage that part. And
Just goes.
I just dump a bundle into the asset pipeline, it goes right out. But I don't even do the minification that he's doing, so I can totally do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't done that yet. But, you know, this does, you can't necessarily embed ERB in here for like image pack or something like that. This does still end up going through sprockets. Doesn't really address your question, but it's a keep in mind.
Hey John, if you have all of this,
Yep.
why are you still using sprockets at all?
Because we have an existing application with lots of stuff in it. Yeah. So if this is a greenfield project, you can totally separate them as the two and just have Rails be the API, and you know even build up a static client and serve from S3 if you wanted. But if you have an existing application, you don't want to necessarily give up all the work you've already done. So we've got a bunch of pages that are jQuery and Knockout, and now pages as well that are reactive and bundled with Webpack, and they work alongside each other. So that's pretty much why. Or if you're just comfortable doing this, you know, if you're comfortable with Rails and deploying Rails applications, don't want to worry about bundling this up, throwing it on S3, that kind of stuff. As configured here, it's pretty easy to just throw it on Roku. Sort of related to that, we've added a rake task for Webpack, which is Webpack build. So we'll see what that looks like. So we say, okay, it's time to deploy, or we want to test it out running production locally. We don't want to see what the assets look like off the dev server. We want to see and make sure they work like minified, right? So we'll say rake, Webpack, build. And we've added this rake task, and basically what it does is runs this, shells out to this command, switches to the client directory, and says, okay, Webpack, bundle the assets. This config, these options. So do that. So up here we can see that the sort of the size of the bundle that we're using in development, which includes all the different things. It's not minified, it's not optimized, it's got the Webpack thing running in the background with the socket listening for changes. That's 285 kilobytes, which is ridiculously huge for a simple little counter, little timer. But with the production stuff bundled up, we're only looking at 8 kilobytes, so that's nice. And then we can break Webpack clean. So okay, we need to break Webpack build whenever we deploy. That can be sort of a pain. We don't really want to keep these bundled assets in version control. So what we do is we enhance the pre-compilation rake task. So okay, whenever you're going to precompile, also do this. Do that first. So build the assets first, then precompile. So now when we're deploying on Heroku or something, Heroku knows and understands the step precompile, run rake assets precompile. Well, now this runs as well, and that's all we had to do. Do we have any questions on that? No? So looking at our development configuration, we're going to add a couple of entry points to the Webpack config. And these entry points are basically the hot reloading endpoints. That's what enables us to do the hot reloading. So again, here the output sort of specifies where we're going to stick these assets, where we're going to serve them. This again mirrors where Rails would serve them. Globals plugin, this allows us to sort of define constants that will be available in any module that we don't have to import. So frequently in our Rails apps, we'll ask Rails.inf.production and then behave accordingly. There are certain situations where we want to know, are we running the development environment right now? We want to know that in our JavaScript. So we can define a global that will be injected by Webpack in all of our files. So we say, okay, dev is true here in this development configuration. We define plugins where we add any additional plugins to the compiler. Like this hot module replacement, that's run by a plugin, maintaining that socket, sending over the new code. And the globals, which we just defined here as a plugin. Now, how Webpack is going to compile that code, we have these different dev tools. And this may actually be provided by Babel. Not sure. But anyways, the sort of short of it is eval source map will preserve your source map. So when you look in the inspector in Chrome, you say, well, my JavaScript's broken. What line is it broken on? It'll tell you correctly with your ES6 code or CoffeeScript or whatever it might be that you're using. And eval will run a little quicker and allow you to do hot reloading. I think it's just a bug in Webpack that's sort of a long-standing known bug that doesn't allow you to have source map with hot reloading. But that's sort of a short. We use eval. It's usually fairly easy to tell what the what the ES5 that's broken is and translate that back to the ES6. They're similar enough. And then these loaders again, we're going to override, or sort of, I guess they're not defined here, but we're going to define how we load the JavaScript here in development. Because if we're using something like React hot loader and we're using React, we add a loader for that. And again, this is going to be state framework agnostic, so that's sort of beyond the scope. But we can define loaders that are specific to our development environment, which is very useful. So then in production, I've touched on a few of these things already, but the output, it's basically the same. Probably beefed up into the comment. We're going to define the same plug global again, except dev this time is false. Which, it being false, it's actually a false value. So if we have any conditionals that are like if underscore dev, it essentially becomes if false in Webpack's eyes. And so Webpack can say, well, if false is always, it's never going to get executed, so throw it away. And so that code actually won't even end up in the bundled JavaScript, which is nice. Here are the plugins we're using again. We're going to deduplicate. If we import multiple modules multiple times in multiple places, we don't have any, we don't need duplicates of those. Uglify.js, it's just going to minify it, uglify it. Aggressive merging, we don't need that with this. And then define plugin process data of production. In the node world, whenever you're running production, you always want to sort of define your process data production. It's kind of like the, again, Rails equivalent would be the Rails.env. So that's what we did there. And again, like in React, it'll look and say, okay, are we running production? If so, eliminate a bunch of sanity checks. Webpack then will see, okay, these are never going to get executed, throw them away, don't serve them. So that's why we do that here. And this is just like a levels plugin we defined up here. So again, these may be different in development and production, which is why it's nice to be able to define them differently. So that's sort of the configuration we're using right now in production for Webpack. So we defined the entry point here as app.js, so we'll look at that. So you go scripts, app.js. We import jQuery from the external that we provided in configuration. We import our styles, we import them directly into JavaScript here. So if you have like component-specific styles, you can just import those styles. If you have global application styles, you can import them at your app entry point here. And so here we're going to say, okay, I'm document ready, make this timer object, and here's the behavior. This syntax is ES6, so the ES5 will be like this. ES6 lets us do that. So it's fairly self-explanatory, simple jQuery code, but that's the whole sort of tool chain.
Can you show where that's included, like where the final bundle
Yes.
gets included to your like index HTML?
Yep, so we put that in the application layout. So alongside the Rails application manifest here, we've added that to generated main Webpack bundle. And we made a little generated directory over here just to keep things sane and straight. So that's where Webpack is going to stick it whenever it bundles. So we include that over here. And the reason we don't include that in just the application manifest is so that it can proxy those requests and recognize this is actually a different file that we want to load. Otherwise, it would just be an request as application.js. So yeah, that's sort of most of everything. I've probably accidentally skipped a lot, but do you have any questions or anything like that?
You mentioned you're currently using it in a hybrid fashion.
Yep.
But you're not, what is it, you're not doing like an Ionic or type thing, you're serving it into a web view with native navigation, or I'm assuming, or?
Well, we're not talking about a native app here. We're talking about like
What it looks like in Safari or something?
Yeah, yeah. So you know, with the traditional Rails app, you got a page reload every time you hit a new route. Click a link, page reload. Click a link, page reload. Lose all the state, everything like that. Single page app is the opposite. It's a completely different paradigm. It loads once, and then we'll just make AJAX calls whenever you navigate. Look like a completely fresh page, but it just made an AJAX call for the data. And sort of doing that, okay, we've got a route. Imagine we've got a appointments/ID shown in the appointment page. Well, the Rails application needs to know something about that. So does the client if you've got a single page app. If you've got a Rails application going over there and you start with an appointments index page and link to that page, click that. Well, if you started in a single page app and click there, the client knows about the route, it'll render the route just fine. But if you start fresh or click refresh and navigate there, well, that's going to be served by the Rails app. It needs to know about those routes. And so the knowledge of the routes kind of has to be in the same two places. And so by hybrid, I mean an application where some of our routes are just regular old pages rendered by Rails. Some of them are client routes, essentially. So we have both now. Like I mentioned, it's sort of two ways to do that. You either need to give your client knowledge of your Rails routes. That way when you navigate to them, it doesn't freak out and get confused. Or you need to say, any route that Rails doesn't recognize is fine to just serve up the single page app client. And then it's the client's job to recognize that route or not.
Which is what that regex was, right?
No, so that's sort of a separate concept.
Okay.
The regex is just about serving the asset development. So our first approach to this essentially was to say, okay, let's have the client know about the Rails routes. And so we built up this, we started defining our JavaScript routes in Ruby, and then just serialized it and passed it to the client. That way they both knew about those routes. And they could check, and if it was in there, serve the client. And that got sort of cumbersome. There ended up being a lot of code around that, a lot of machinery and corner cases. So we sort of ditched that for the approach of saying, okay, we don't have any more server rendered 404s. There's no such thing as a 404 that's an HTML request in our app anymore. If it's an HTML request and we don't recognize the route, we're just going to assume the client knows about it. If the client doesn't know about it, the client will render a 404. So that's sort of the approach we've taken. Yeah.
So on your Webpack production configuration, are you extracting your CSS style sheets from your JavaScript files?
Nope. They are just mixed in there right with the JavaScript. Yeah.
Have you had any use cases for theming?
For theming?
Style sheet, theming, say you have like multiple clients that have different style sheets.
No, we don't have any use cases like that yet. The only thing that we do that's close to that is showing different logos for different subdomains. But no, we don't have any themes. But if you were to do something like that, yeah, I have to think about that. Are there, in your use case, are there sort of constants between them, or do even like buttons and things look different?
Well, so we have it set down to where we just have one variable SAS file that we switch out to clients. But we run into situations to where when we actually extract the style sheet and serve it separately, then there is no context between which client is in which style sheet. It's actually bundling, pretty much all the styles into a single style sheet, and you got or a class selector problem. So we were looking into, there is a concept, I believe, that's like CSS modules, that can kind of prefix your style sheet with that particular theme using the app.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you guys.
Yeah, we don't.
Are you guys using SAS?
Yes,
I think that's primarily a SAS issue.
just as.
I dealt with, I think, potentially something similar on a project that I'm working on, and I can talk to you about it later, but.
Any other questions? Okay, well, that's it.
You said that's on GitHub?
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Yeah, so there's no other questions. We have the room until about 7:30. Feel free to hang out and chat. But at 7:30 we are going to have a hard cutoff. I got to shut off. I got to shut everything down and turn on the alarm and close everything up. But thank you all for coming out. I would like to know if anybody has any interest in giving a talk next month. Any takers on that?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I might do the Trailblazer thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but we are looking for speakers, so if you know people like maybe who've spoken somewhere before, gave a talk live, or anyone that we could reach out to, just pass that along to us.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.